Hi, it's Karen Romano Young, back with A Girl, a Raccoon, and the Midnight Moon, my book, illustrated by Jessixa Bagley and published by Chronicle Kids in January 2020. Chapter 1, The Scream. Pearl's scream blasted from the third-story window at the rear of the Lancaster Avenue branch of the New York City Library and carried out over the late summer air, over the yew hedge, up the rear wall of the white brick apartment house that backed up to the garden, through the trash can alley, across Clancy Street, and on. It was a noisy neighborhood in the first place, a city neighborhood on the edge of things, with lots of people in it. People who sometimes screamed. Babies screamed for the usual reasons. Little kids screamed for the Mr. Softy truck, or if one of the big kids was pretending to be a coyote or a robber or something else scary. Adults screamed sometimes over a big game, or in frustration with the kids, or the job, or the language, or just the city. The city was enough to make anyone scream. But among all these screams, Pearl's scream stood out. It made people stop what they were doing, picking up groceries at violet-haired Rosita's Rosebud Bodega, browsing in Gully's Buckaby. Even Mr. Gulliver, Gully himself, paused right as he was ringing up the 24 animal-shaped erasers that Alice Patel was buying for story hour in the library's children's room. Alice was the children's librarian, 6 months pregnant. "That's Pearl," said Alice. She grabbed the erasers and ran, her sneakers pounding across Lancaster Avenue. One girl, stuck alone in her granny's apartment above the Buckaby, hung out the window so far her black braids brushed the top of Gully's sign. But she couldn't see who was screaming. She broke her granny's rules and ran out of the apartment. People in the shops, at Tallulah's newsstand, in the apartments on either side of the library and all along Lancaster Avenue, looked out their windows, but they couldn't see what was causing the scream. For the first time for most of them, they beelined for the library and barged inside. And now we have kind of a secret sentence in parentheses. Of course, nobody knew I was there, hidden in the yew bushes. In his third-floor office, Bruce leaped out of his chair, grabbed Pearl by the shoulders, and looked hard into her face. "What is it? What's got you? Where does it hurt?" Pearl didn't have any wind left. She just pointed. "What's wrong with Pearl?" Alice came tearing up the stairs, her sari held up to her knees to give her speed. Mom, hasty and loud, in her high heels. "What is it?" cried Mom. And over here, on the side of the page, is something called a sidebar. A sidebar about sidebars. Say you're watching a play and the characters are all talking to each other, and suddenly one turns and says something to the audience like, "Watch this," or "But he was wrong." That's an aside. Or say someone's telling a story and they pause the action for a second and say, "If she had only known then what she found out later." That's another example of an aside. But in writing, how do you do an aside? Well, in parentheses, of course. And then in parentheses it says, here is an example of an aside. When you put an aside on the side like this, then you call it a sidebar. Sidebars have bylines, a line that tells you who wrote them, just like any written piece in a newspaper, magazine, or book. This one was written by M.A.M. Bruce held up his hands to calm both Alice and Mom. "It's not Pearl, it's Vincent." He pulled Pearl back from the high, narrow window so they could look out. In the garden, the statue stood headless in the morning light. Mom closed her eyes and sighed when she saw. "Oh, rats! Oh, Pearl," she said. "What'll we do?" Alice thumped her fist on the windowsill so hard the glass and the panes rattled. Those idiots. Who? Said Pearl. Who do you mean? Should we go after them? She stood with her feet wide, fists clenched, eyes fierce, hair wild, ready for battle. Bruce held up his hand. It's too late now. Then he led the mad dash back down the stairs. All of them charged down the one narrow staircase from the 3rd floor to the 2nd. Then Mom and Alice ran down the straight back stairs, and Bruce and Pearl ran down the spiral stairs to the 1st floor, where they were met with the entire neighborhood. What's wrong? Yelled Gully. Who's screaming? Asked Tallulah, the shuffling, stripy-haired, bright-eyed woman who ran the newsstand. What's going on? Asked all the neighborhood people. It was me, said Pearl fiercely. Our statue's head is gone, and I'd like to know why. She glared around with squinting eyes, suspecting them all. That's the end of chapter 1. Now, if you missed the beginning of this story, you can go back to day 1 on YouTube or on Instagram. I'm posting in both places. Thank you. Bye. See you tomorrow.